Is God really there? We're actually on our 13th class. 13th class. Hard to believe. Last week we talked about the idea of the problem of evil, didn't we? We've discussed it in a couple of ways, and we've worked our way to where we are right now. The idea of evil is, people want to use that to dispute the concept of God and the idea of a God. And the problem of evil is what it tries to do is it tries to place the attributes of supreme goodness. We talked about the attributes of God too, didn't we? The idea of His all goodness, His all loving kindness, His omnipotence, His omniscience, all of these things, all these attributes of God. And what people want to do is they want to take these things and they want to place them in opposition to one another. And that's the concept of evil, is how could God be supremely good and want what's best for everything, but then have the power to change it and not change it? So they say, well, one of two things. God, either God is not omnipotent, God is not all good, or God doesn't truly exist. He certainly can't be all good, want only what's good, and then when He has the opportunity to change things, not change things. Well, that's the main argument that a lot of atheists and a lot of agnostics want to use to disprove the existence of God. So we're going to talk about that idea, that concept of are the attributes of God in opposition to each other? Is He self-contradictory in His nature? Well, we know that He's not, because we understand God a little bit better than the atheist and the agnostic. We understand Him through the Bible, and the Bible certainly explains a great deal of what's going on. So if the problem of evil can be answered in a rational manner, which we did several weeks ago, we answered the question of why is there evil in the world if there's a God, and so forth and so on. Those who disbelieve in a God really only have one other avenue that they can pursue, right? One other course that they can pursue, and they can show that the very concept of God, the very idea of God, and the definition, if you could truly define a God, the very definition of God is self-contradictory, or it's incoherent. You can't really understand it. Now, have I well and truly confused you yet? Because I am. All right, let's continue on. All right, one common approach is to question how God can be all-knowing and at the same time allow man freedom to act as he chooses. In other words, can there be an omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful God and man be truly free to do as he wishes? All right, we know that. I mean, that to us doesn't pose any problem, right? We know there is a God. We are convinced fully 100% in our own mind that there is a God. Do I have free will? Yeah, I do. I have free will. I can do anything I want to do within reason. I mean, I can't supersede nature. I can't cause things to happen that are not physically possible for mankind to do physically. But I have the choice to do whatever it is I wish to do within the realm of natural abilities. Okay, I don't have the power to fly, but I certainly have the power to climb up on top of Stone Mountain and jump off. Now, I may delude myself into thinking I can fly, but if I want to, I can do that. I have the power to do that. I can choose to, and it's not all bad. I can choose to go in, I can choose to cash in all of the wealth I have, take every single penny of it, and go up on top of a building and just throw it off into the air, and whoever, just distribute my wealth that way. Also, I have the power, if I want, to go in, take a gun and go into a convenience store and shoot everybody inside. That's my free moral agency. I have the ability to do that. And simply because God knows what I'm going to do even before I do it does not mean that I don't have free will. You had a question.
Yeah, these people who don't believe in God, they also, so they don't believe in Satan, so they don't believe in nothing.
No. Typically, people are going to believe in evil, and they believe in good, but they don't believe in an all-good being and an all-evil being. They believe that everything that we see is a construct of mankind. And you'll find it's very interesting because a lot of it is self-contradictory. The idea that, there is no God, so therefore there is no good, but they themselves will say that something is wrong. If you do not believe that there is a God, and you believe that, we've talked about this, right, haven't we? There is no God, but I can live a moral life without God. And my question is, how can you live a moral life without God? If there is no God, and we are simply products of an environment, we are products of the forces of nature coming together in just the right way to produce what we see before us today. Human beings as we see them. If we truly believe that, then there is no absolute moral nature, is there? There's only moral relativism. In other words, what's right for me may not be right for you. They'll take that and say, well, it's perfectly acceptable for me to engage in aberrant behavior. For example, I may choose that I want to be attracted to chickens. Okay, our littlest one's out. I want to be sexually attracted to chickens. That's my choice. And as far as moral relativism is concerned, it is your choice. But they'll also say that to go and murder someone is wrong. Well, how can it be wrong? What's right for me is right for me. That's moral relativism. And how can you say there is no moral truth, moral absolutism, but you could say that that's wrong 100% of the time? See, that's self-contradictory. That makes no sense. We're saying that there is an absolute right and wrong. There are things that are absolutely right and absolutely wrong. And we don't shirk away from that. The idea that I may say that you're free to do this if you choose, but I'm also free to tell you you're wrong for doing it. And we need to remember that. That's what the world doesn't want us to believe. They want everything in shades of gray. They don't want a moral black and white, so to speak, where this is always wrong and this is always right. You know, I've had this discussion with people before, and they can't answer it. They can't answer it truthfully. It's always about couching their answer in, well, you know, that's been right for that time, but it's not right for now. Well, no, hold on now. If it was right, it was right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And we have to be able to speak clearly on that. So there are people who believe that there is no God, but yeah, if you're going to be consistent, you'd have to say that there's no Satan either. There's simply us. All right. So like I said, this common approach is to question how God can be all-knowing and at the same time allow man to have the freedom to act as he chooses. And remember we have syllogisms, right? What's our syllogism? If this and this, then this. And it can be 3 points or 2 points or 4 points, but you have to have a conclusion at the end. So here's our syllogism for the night. Actually, there's 2. All right, number 1. The argument goes like this. God knows before we're born everything that we will do. God knows before we're born everything that we will do. I think we can agree on that as Christians. We know if we understand the Bible correctly, then we do know that. God knows me before I was born. He knit me together. He knows what I'm going to do, and nothing is going to surprise Him. He knows even when I'm a child where I'm going to spend eternity. Now here's where it takes a left turn now. If God knows before we were born, this is their argument, not ours. Remember this. If God knows before we were born everything that we're going to do, then it's never really in our power to do otherwise. Okay, number 1, God knows before we were born everything that we're going to do. Number 2, if God knows before we were born everything that we will do, if that first part is true, then it's never really in our power to do anything other than that. Can you see the problem with the argument already? See the problem with the argument. But there is a group of people who believe this now, so let's continue on. So, number 3, if it is never in our power to do otherwise, so if number 2 is true, if it's never in our power to do otherwise, then there is no true human freedom. We see the dilemma in this, but the argument makes sense. The argument, the way they're phrasing it, makes perfect sense. All right? If it's never in our power to do otherwise, then there's no true human freedom. That's true. If it's not within our power to do otherwise, but there's the issue right there. Therefore, number 4, there is no human freedom. So let's go back through this again. God knows, and let's see where we have our points of agreement, right? God knows before we're born everything that we will do. We agree with that, right? All right. If God knows before we were born everything that we will do, then it is never in our power to do otherwise. There's where our problem comes in, right? There's where our understanding of the Bible and understanding of God kind of throws a monkey wrench into that argument. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how God can know everything that we're going to do, yet still allow us the freedom to do the things that we want to do. Because that's where our problem goes. That's where we have to deal with people when they come up with this argument. But we still agree with number 3, right? If it's never in our power to do otherwise, then there's no human freedom. Yeah, that makes sense. If we don't have the power to do what we want to do, then there's no human freedom. I don't know how you can disagree with that. The problem breaks down in number 2, the second part of that argument. But therefore, there is no human freedom. So what we've got to do is we've got to address number 2. Now, there is a group of people who do believe this, don't they? Calvinists believe this, don't they? Right? Calvinists do not believe that there is true moral freedom. They believe that everything that we say, everything that we do has already been predestined that we would say or do this. In other words, if I'm confronted with something, I'm going to take a course of action and there's nothing that I can say or do it because it's been determined long before I was born that I was going to go down that road. Here's the problem. There's a difference between foreknowledge and pre-knowledge and predestination. And that's where we've got to come in and we've got to figure this out. All right? So there are people who believe this. They believe that, everything that you say thousands or millennia ago, the next words that come out of my mouth were predestined that I would say these things. It was predestined whether I would accept the gospel. It was predestined whether I would go to heaven. And see, they're confusing foreknowledge with predestination, and that's a dangerous, dangerous thing because that makes God a liar. And that's, I don't even want to call him a liar, much less think he's a liar. So that's not true. All right. So this is the view of Calvinists and other believers in predestination. Now, let's reverse this argument, and we can see where the atheist can pick this up and run with it. Okay. The atheist looks at this in the reverse and in the negative. So let's look at this. Number 1, there is human freedom. They believe that there is human freedom. We have the ability to go and do and say and act and behave in the way that which we want to. So there is human freedom, number 1. Number 2, if there is human freedom, then of course it is within our power to do as we wish. If there's human freedom, then we can do whatever we want to do. And they cling to this. They cling to the idea. Have you ever heard an atheist or even an agnostic say, I believe in my freedom, I believe in my will to do what I want to do. I'm a self-determining individual. Hey, listen, God doesn't want to take that away from you. He wants you to be self-determined. There's a course of action that He wants you to pursue. He's not going to make you do it, but He wants you to go down this path. All right, so number 1, there is human freedom. Number 2, if there is human freedom, then it is within our power to do as we wish. Hey, so far I'm in agreement, right? So far I'm in agreement. Since we can do as we wish, since we have freedom and we can do what we want to, God cannot know everything we will do. If it's within our freedom to pick and choose what we're going to do, then God cannot of necessity know what we're going to do. Remember, this is the atheist looking at this, not us. It's the way they look at it. If we have free will, then we can do whatever we want to, and God cannot know. They would say, well, God can't know what I'm going to do next. And who knows what that's going to be accompanied by, some crazy action, and they say, well, God didn't know I was going to do that. So, God cannot do everything that we will do, therefore He is not omniscient. He doesn't know everything. If God is not omniscient, then He's not God. Well, yeah. God, He's known what everybody's going to do. When He called Noah, He knew Noah was going to do it because He knew Noah was faithful. When He called Abram, He knew Abram was faithful and He knew he would do it. Okay? So we got 2 arguments. All right, one is for the people who believe in predestination. The other one is for the atheist/agnostic, those who truly believe in human freedom. God can't know what I'm going to do next, therefore, if He's not omniscient, then He's not God. Well, that part we can agree on. If God is not omniscient, then He's not truly God, is He? But He is omniscient. So let's look at this for just a little bit. All right, so they have to answer this dilemma. Now, and when I'm talking about believers, we have to answer this dilemma. Okay, how can God know everything but still allow us freedom of action? Freedom to do as we choose. Freedom to do as we will. All right, so we have to answer that dilemma. All right, now in answering this dilemma, some people would propose that God simply limits His own knowledge. That's the end of and for them, that's the end of the discussion. Well, God can simply pick and choose that what He will know and that He will not know. He determines that in order for my supreme plan to go forward, I need to know this. Therefore, He knows it. And the things that are not necessary to know, then I just simply choose not to know those things. Now, there's kind of a difficulty in that, especially if we look at it from a human standpoint. Then that's perfectly understandable, right? We understand that from a human standpoint. As humans, can we pick and choose our own knowledge? Can we limit our own knowledge? Of course. I mean, people do it all the time. I know a little bit about business and finance, but I don't know anything about neurosurgery. I limited my own knowledge on that. The thing about it is, I don't claim to be a neurosurgeon. Now, if I claimed to be a neurosurgeon and limited my knowledge on that, I'd make a pretty poor neurosurgeon, wouldn't I? I mean, you wouldn't want me operating on you for sure. Okay? So that makes perfect sense from a very human standpoint. We can limit our knowledge. All right? So he limits his own knowledge to the things that he chooses to know. Now, like I said, for a human being, that makes perfect sense. We're able to do this. The problem is, God exists differently than we do, don't he? He's different than we are. And we compare ourselves to Him at our own peril. All right? When we say that as human being that I'm God-like, and there are religions, there are people that believe themselves to be, their own God. I am my own God. And they say that proudly with zero irony. But there they are. They say that. All right? So, as human beings, we can limit our own knowledge. God doesn't exist the way that we do. So let's look at two problems with this idea of God limiting His knowledge. Deciding to limit His knowledge, not just being caught unawares or in the dark or surprised by things, but deliberately limiting His own knowledge. Because there's a question, there's a couple of questions that creep up with that, right? All right. Number one, why does God foreknow some things and not others? All right. Why does God foreknow this, but not this? How would He do such a thing? Why would He do such a thing? How does He determine what to know and what to refrain from knowing? Can you give me a situation where this might not pan out so well for us? God chose certain things to know and certain things not to know. He made that decision not to know certain things. When we ask for things from God, what does it require of Him? Okay, yeah, what does it require from God for us to, when we request things from God, what does it require on the part of God? No, He didn't have to have faith in us. Yeah, well, what does it require from God when we pray to Him? When we ask Him for something, when we petition God for some things, what does it require from God when we pray to Him? He has to know what we need, not what we simply ask. I may ask Him for something, but if He doesn't know me, how is He going to give me what I truly need? If He simply just, for example, let's look at this. Everybody here has dealt with small children around Christmas time, right? Children ask for things, and usually they have a little list. I always remember getting a little catalog, and I would circle the things that I wanted. And I'd make my little list, and I always loved doing that. And I didn't always get what I wanted from the catalog. I got a lot of toys. I always had a good time with my toys, but I always got a lot of stuff that I really needed. Okay, what did that require? What did that require for somebody to get me underwear and socks? They had to know that I needed them. Right? They had to know that I needed something like that. If all they got was my list, then all I'm going to get is things that are on my list. But I had family members and friends of ours and whoever, when I would open the gift, it was like, well, I didn't ask for that. I mean, I was never ugly or rude about it, but it was sort of like, what's that doing here? I don't need that. What is that supposed to, what are they trying to tell me? I don't need these things. But I did. And the reason that they got me those things was because they were smart enough to ask, hey, he's asked for this, this, and this, but what does he need? Oh, he needs some new socks. He needs some new underwear. He needs a new belt. He needs a pair of trousers or a new shirt or something like that. It may not be what he wants, but it's something that he truly needs. So if we talk about God limiting his knowledge, there are a lot of problems that come along with God artificially limiting his knowledge. So if he's going to shower abundant blessings upon the world, and does he bless the unrighteous and the righteous alike? Yeah, he certainly does. Why? Because he knows who we are. He knows what we need better than we know what we need. How many times have you seen somebody ask for something that's not what, and you knew it? I mean, you even sitting back as an objective observer, you realize that's not really what they need. That's what they're asking for, but that's not really what they need. What they need is this, this, and this. Well, guess what? If we can sit back and we can see those things, then can God not sit back and see the same thing? Even better? Absolutely. Absolutely. So God has to know us, and not just know what we reveal to him, but he needs to know even deeper than we are on the surface. Okay? So there's a couple of perils. This idea that God limits his knowledge is fraught with peril when you simply look at it that way. Well, God's just limiting his knowledge. Well, why would he do that? If he seeks his will in all things, in which he does, then why would God limit his knowledge in any way, shape, or form at all? What would be the point behind that? Wouldn't you exercise, if you had the abilities of God, wouldn't you exercise them in the very best way possible? Absolutely. To me, it goes even to more, not just his attributes, but to the nature of God. If God truly wants what's best for everyone, then why would God artificially limit his knowledge simply to be surprised at a later date? You know? Well, that's the question. That's where this has a problem. That's where this really presents a great many issues when you talk about the God not being omniscient. That God would limit his own knowledge. That there would be no reason to limit his knowledge. Has anybody ever found a Christmas present before it was Christmas? A Christmas present to you before it was Christmas? You realize, I wasn't supposed to see this, right? So you maybe wrap it back up, or you put it to the side. You don't like, I didn't see that. And then when Christmas, or when the day arrives and everybody's opening their gifts, you go, oh, this is the greatest I had no idea. And you make a big deal of it. Kids don't always hide them very well. Sometimes your spouse doesn't always hide them very well. Or maybe it was just a complete accident that was revealed to you. But at the end of the day, you knew about something and then you hid it again, and then you were surprised when it happened. This is another scenario that we look at when God limits his knowledge. Does he find something out and then simply forget about it, and then when it happens, he's surprised all over again? That makes no sense either. There's no reason for this whatsoever. So the idea of God artificially limiting his knowledge doesn't fly in the face of what we understand about God. If you are a God that loves his creation, you want to know everything about him. I mean, all you have to do is look at the way that we deal with each other, men and women deal with each other, right? When you're with that person for the first time and you're getting to know them, what do you want to know about them? Everything. That's why you want to find out about a man. You go to his wife and you ask her questions. You want to find out about a woman. You go to her husband and you ask questions, because they know everything. And if we think about that in the way that the church has been described as the bride of Christ, why wouldn't he want to know everything about his creation? Okay? It doesn't fly. It doesn't make any sense. Even on the surface, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense about. But remember, this is the argument for the concept that God cannot be omniscient and all good. Okay, he can't be both of those things, because he wants mankind to have complete freedom of action. But if he knows everything about us, then we don't really have complete freedom of action. But again, we need to remember that foreknowledge does not mean predestination. Those two things are not. Those things don't jibe with each other. They're not the same thing. All right. So, how does he determine what to know and what to refrain from knowing? Okay. Does he know a particular thing and then forget it in order for the approach to be accurate? These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves. All right. Number two. I'm going to pick this up. This is the fact that Omnipotence does not equal omniscience. Those two things don't equate to each other. Okay? There are two different things completely. Are they both a part of God's attributes? Yes, they are, 100%. God is both omnipotent and He is omniscient. He is all-powerful and He sees all things. But this argument that omnipotence equates with omniscience, it assumes a little bit too much. Let's look at this for a second. All right. It is true that God does not do all of the things within His power. Is that true? God doesn't do everything within His power. Is God all-powerful? Yes. Okay, I think we can all agree on that. Does He do everything within His power? No. There's things that He doesn't do, right? Would it be within His power? Yes, ma'am. Uh-huh. Oh, the idea of God of that limiting God's power. Okay, I understand, and I understand what they're saying. They're saying if the statement, in case you didn't hear, their statement has been made that even God cannot change what happened in the past. All right, that what's happened has happened, and that is outside of God's purview. And actually, where I'm going with this is going to kind of speak to this idea. I heard somebody, and I'll even shape the idea a little bit better. Somebody asked the question one time in the idea of omnipotence of God. It says, can an all-powerful God create an object that even He Himself cannot lift? All right, you see the conundrum there. Can an all-powerful God, a one that can do anything, can He create an object that even He cannot lift? All right. So what we do is our minds start going, well, listen. Here's the thing. We got to remember this. It is not that we limit God. Let me finish with this because this speaks to this a little bit. All right. It is true that God does not do all of the things within His power, but that does not limit, it does not count against, and it does not limit His omnipotence. All right. Can God change things that happened in the past? Is it possible for Him to do so? Yeah, it is possible for Him to do so. In essence, that He has done some things that change what happened in the past. Remember, He's destroyed the world once. Did that change what happened in the past? Yeah, it did. It did. Because remember, His desire was for the entire world to live in harmony with Him. His goal was for mankind to never have to leave the garden. So did He change essentially what happened in the past? Yes. Here's the thing. Simply because God does not choose to do that does not mean that He cannot do that if He so desired. Then we start looking at the idea of the nature of God, the concept of can God, an all-powerful God, create an object that even He Himself cannot lift? What you're trying to do is you're trying to you're begging the point, because here's the thing: God is not going to act outside of His nature. God has a nature, and it's not a nature like ours. God has a nature, and God will not. And I won't say cannot, but will not, because it's not His nature. Could God sin? Could God sin? No. Here, and this is why. This is why. Now, I understand what you're saying. But it is not God's nature. It is not in God's nature to do that. God, unlike us, will not act outside of His nature. He will not. Could He condemn an innocent man? No. Can He? No, it's not inside of His nature. And see, that's the difference between us and God, is that God's nature is different from ours. The way that God thinks and the way God acts is so... There's a reason that the psalmist said, your ways are far above our ways. Your knowledge and your understanding, your being is so much greater than where we can't... And when people say, well, I can't really conceive of a God, well, welcome to the club. It's difficult to conceive of a God. It's hard. If He had not revealed Himself in the way that He revealed Himself, there is no way that we could have come up with a God like this. No way. If we sat down and I gave that model of the infinite number of monkeys, the infinite number of typewriters, and one of them is going to produce the works of Shakespeare, given an infinite amount of time. The same thing has to do with the nature of God. If you put an infinite number of human beings with an infinite number of typewriters in a room for an infinite number of years, we would never be able to devise a God the way that God has revealed himself to us, because his nature is so far above anything that we can understand. That's why from a human standpoint, we say, why would God send a sinning person to hell for eternity? It's because we cannot comprehend what sin really is in regards to how it affronts God. We can't, because we let things go. We eventually relent and see God is not one when this world is over. He is not one who will relent. Your decision has been made, and that decision is in place for an eternity. And see, for us as humans, we think, well, no, that's not fair. That's not right. That's not what we. That's not. Mercy. He says, in his idea, in his understanding, is the time for mercy is over. The time for judgment is now, and he is implacable. We can plead and we can cry, and you better believe when this world is over, there are going to be people, and they're going to be pleading, and they're going to be crying for mercy. And he's saying the time for that was then. Now is now. So is it in God's nature to do those things? That's the key. God, it is not in God's nature to go back and change the things that happened in the past. Could he? Certainly. He could rewind. It'd be like one of those old VHS tapes, when you hit rewind and everybody goes in reverse. You don't see that as much now with all the new technology. You don't see that much. You remember when you used to be able to reverse it and everybody just go in reverse? He could do that if he chose to do that. He absolutely could. But it is not in his nature to do so, so he will not do it. You will never see him. It's not even that he can't, it's that he won't. It's set in stone. The way God is the way God is, and it's not going to change. He is, no matter what people might say, he is a consistent God. All right? If he were to go back and change this, then why wouldn't he? Then he would be unfair, wouldn't he? Why didn't you go back and do this? Why didn't you go back even further and change this? My son was killed in a car wreck. Why won't you go back and change that? Are you a respecter of persons? Why did you go back and change this for this person, but not for me? Because God is consistent. He's consistently good. And would that make him a respecter of persons if he went backwards and changed this for this group of people or this for this person and not for me? Not for an innocent child. And we could rightfully call him biased. We could rightfully call him prejudiced against whatever. But as he's not going to lift the burden of sin and disease from his children, he's not going to create more for the people that are outside of his faith. Okay? It's not in God's nature to do those things. Could he create a rock that even he couldn't lift? I mean, you're talking about going against the nature of God. Right? He's going to act in a way that conforms to his nature. I mean, I don't know whether a better way to state it than that. But God is pure, and God is just, and God is consistent in what he does. Okay? So, as we said, it's true that God does not do all of the things within his power, but it doesn't count against his omnipotence. It doesn't necessarily follow that God can choose to limit his knowledge and still remain omnipotent. Okay? They differ. The idea of omniscience and omnipotence, they differ in one very important way. Right? To be omniscient, God must know all things, and not simply have the ability to know all things. The very definition of omniscient is all-knowing. Okay? There's a big difference between the two. Omniscience means all-knowing. Not all-knowing when you want to. Omniscient means I know all things. Omnipotence means simply the ability to do all things, not necessarily having done them. There's something very important that God has not done yet that's well within his power. That's the destruction of this universe and everything in it. Does he have the power to do that? Yeah, he has the ability to do that. He has the power to do that, and he says that he's going to do that, but he hasn't done it yet. Does that count against God's omnipotence simply because he hasn't done that yet? No. Of course he is. He is all-powerful and he's all-knowing. And those two things don't count against each other. Am I making sense? I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, and I don't want to do that. Oh, where am I? Well, there are people who don't necessarily believe that God is omnipresent. because that also is fraught with peril in the idea about what does it mean by being present in all things. God is spirit. Can God manifest himself? He can. He has manifested himself. Is he present in the world in which we live? To a certain extent, yes, but not necessarily the idea of a physical presence in that it takes up space. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, we got to remember that Scripture tells us that God is not willing that any should perish. And even the most vile offender, even the most vile human being, because I don't know if you've ever watched some of these shows where it talks about people who've just committed these heinous crimes, just awful. I mean, things that just make your skin crawl just to look at them. You just think, this person is evil. They are just evil incarnate. But God looks at that person and He looks at them the same way as He looks at anyone else. He says that is a soul that if it's not reached is going to spend an eternity in hell. Listen, I'm so thankful that God does not strike us down for sin. I mean, that's something that I think we can all be pretty glad of, right? Because there's been some times where after we did something, we kind of, maybe not realistically, but we just kind of looked up and thought, if He's ever going to do it, now's the time. If He's ever going to strike me down, this is going to be the time that He does it. Boy, am I glad that He doesn't do that anymore. Man, I'm glad that He doesn't do that anymore. Uh-oh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is one of those. Listen. That's a tough one because, again, that's one of the. Listen, isn't that one of the great things that God knows us better than we know ourselves? Because there are people that have issues. I mean, like majorly mentally ill. They've got real problems. I'm glad that God knows them better than I know them, because if it were left to me, my idea of dispensing justice in cases like that may be completely misplaced. Okay? I don't know them. I do know that if it's within our power to reach such a person, then that's what we do. Some people are mentally ill because they've been warped by their upbringing. You look at some of the cases that we've read of. Many serial killers or serial rapists have been so warped by their upbringing that their perception of reality is not normal. There are people who have problems, diseases of the brain, so to speak. They have chemical imbalances, and then once those things are taken out of the way, all of a sudden they're lucid once again. There are people who have mental illnesses and diseases, and medication allows them to talk to a schizophrenic, okay, when they're really having an episode. Boy, you don't even know they don't even know what's going on. You talk to them and they're so completely out of the normal way of thinking. But then you get them on when they've been taking their medication, and all of a sudden, this is not the same person. This is one of the reasons that I'm glad that God is the one administering that justice and not me. Here's the thing: is it's a dangerous thing to say, well, this person does not deserve it because of who they are, or to go the other direction and say, well, they just don't know anything about it, therefore they don't need to know because they're incompetent to understand it at all. It's given to us to explain the gospel to people, if it's possible for them to understand it. And if it's possible for them to understand it, then they're held accountable for hearing it and not obeying. If you give them the gospel and they're not competent to understand it, then I'm glad that we serve a God that's a fair and accurate judge of mankind. We do evil. We are not evil. No. In the sense that, there's two ways of looking at that. The idea that somehow I think sometimes we've seen so many movies where you see there's some child that grows up and there's one a long time ago. It was called The Bad Seed, and it's like this child that We don't really know what happened, but she was just an evil, evil little girl. She wasn't evil. She was warped. She was twisted, and she did some evil things, but she herself was not evil. We are evil doers, not evil beers. I'm not coining a phrase there. But the idea here is this, and I would, when people ask that question, why doesn't God strike me down? And here's two things. You got two ways of looking at this. If God, what they'll say is, why, if there's a God, then He would strike me down or He would strike this person down for evil. Okay? So there can't be a God. But if God did strike them down for evil, He'd say, what kind of God doesn't show mercy? So you can't please people who are seeking to catch us out. You're not going to please. If they struck them down for the evil, I thought God was a merciful God. Well, what do you want? Do you want Him to be merciful and allow Him freedom of choice to do what He's going to do? We've given Him everything that He knows in order to be reconciled to that God. If He's not going to do it, then the best that we can do is lock Him up. That's all we can do. Or do you want God to strike them down immediately and be caught out as a God that has no mercy for anyone? And like I said, I'm kind of glad that God doesn't strike. Here's another thing. The murder and mayhem and all this stuff that this guy does, when I lie, when I deceive a brother, when I create division, God's as displeased with that as He is with that guy. Why wouldn't He strike me down too? Yes, ma'am. Well, and if you look at who He struck down, look who He struck down and for what. You notice that it's not like God was cleaning up all the murderers and the adulterers. What was He doing? He struck down Uzzah for touching the ark. And we look at that and we think, really? He struck down Herod because Herod spoke, and when they said the voice of a God, not of a man, he didn't give the glory to God. He took the glory for himself, and God struck him down. He struck down Ananias and Sapphira for lying to the Holy Spirit. If we look at what God struck down, listen, folks that are supposed to be close to God are the ones that seem to be more on the receiving end than the world in its sin. I'm kind of glad God doesn't strike us down anymore. I mean, instantaneous judgment, I'm glad that He doesn't do that anymore. I mean, Moses, all of that lifetime of faithfulness, he makes that one strategic error, that one error. And from that point on, he was not able to go into the promised land. Was with all of that time and all of that energy dealing with those lousy Israelites that could not behave. Yes. Because you knew how they were raised and you knew what to expect. And see, that's another point for God's omniscience versus our own. I don't claim to know everything about you. I'm not supposed to. I don't have that ability. God does, though. And because God knows everything, not because He can know everything, but because He does know everything, God's in a far better position to judge and to bless the way that needs to be judged and blessed than the way that we look at things. Why would He withhold this information about you and not this information about this person? You see what I'm saying? It's just, the logic is just not there for all of that. Okay? So, omniscience and omnipotence can't be equal in the same way that we look at them. Omniscience means knowing everything. So if God is omniscient, He knows everything. But in order for God to be omnipotent, it means that He has the ability to do everything, not that He has done everything that He can do. All right? But here's one little more point. If God limited His knowledge of even one thing, He would cease to be omniscient. By the definition of omniscience, if he limited His knowledge in one thing, no matter how minor or minuscule, He would cease to be omniscient. I've chose to limit my knowledge about when this person was born. I've forgotten their birthday, or I never figured that out. I'm not omniscient anymore because that's that one piece of knowledge that I don't know. Okay. But omnipotence only requires that God has the power to do everything that it can be done, not that He's already done everything within the realm of possibility. All right. So we've got here's our thing that God limits His own knowledge. Well, how do we answer this? Real quickly, how do we answer this dilemma about if God knows everything, then we don't have the power to do as we want because God already knows it, and thereby we've been limited. Now, I don't know how you come up with that, but that's the argument, okay? The best possible alternative to confront this question is this, that God exists in a way that we do not exist. God exists outside of the realm of time. Somebody turn to 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8. 2 Peter 3 and verse 8. God does not exist the way we exist. We exist in a universe, a physical universe. And we reckon time differently than God does, don't we? We have a very strict definition of time. You go anywhere in 24 hours is 24 hours. There's not a place that you go that has more than 60 seconds in a minute, or more than 60 minutes in an hour, or more than 24 hours in a day, or more than 7. Time is made for us to keep track of the seasons and the times and the hours. Okay, so sure. Aren't you glad that He's given us the benefit of time? I mean, we've been blessed with the time to be here tonight. You know, as aggravating as this study can be at times, I'm grateful for the time to be here. You know, so God's given us these things. What does 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8 tell us? I hope I wrote this down right. Whoever's got it.
Okay.
Oh.
But love, okay.
No, y'all both started speaking at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with God, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day.
Okay. So what they're saying is it's not like for like. Okay, that's not what he's saying. He's not saying that you know, for God, when God gave us a minute of time, He gave us a minute of time. And a minute of time is the same thing. What he's saying is that God does not view time in the same way that we view time. Not just the minutes and the hours and the days and the weeks and the months, but the years and the millennia. I've said this before, and it bears repeating. God not only sees forward, but He sees backward. He sees sideways. He sees up and down. See, we're on a linear path, aren't we? All right, we're on a linear path. Let's be honest. None of us know what's going to happen in the next minute. We have a pretty good idea because things are fairly consistent for us. Okay, in just a couple of minutes, most likely what's going to happen is we're going to have an invitation song, and then someone's going to lead a prayer, and then we're going to all kind of meet around for a couple of moments. Then everybody's going to kind of go their own way. Tomorrow, if you think about tomorrow, most everybody knows kind of what they're going to do. If nothing major happens or changes things, most of us know what's going to happen the next day, and then the next week. We've kind of got our lives plotted out according to the clock and the calendar. It makes sense for us. But at the end of the day, in the next minute, we have absolutely no idea concretely what's going to happen. Here's the thing, God does. And to Him, when you exist outside of time the way that God does, remember how the Israelites would cry to God and they would pray to God and they would plead with God, and it said that God would remember them. It's that God's timeline is different from ours. We look at the thousands of years that went up to the time of Christ, and then the 2,000 years away from that, and we think, how much longer is it going to be? How much longer is He going to allow this world, this sinful world, to exist before He finally destroys it? And God's saying, you don't need to worry about this. I know when it's going to happen. I've already determined when it's going to happen. It's not going to surprise me. It's going to surprise you. I see backwards. I see what happened in the past. I see what's happening in the future. I see all timelines simultaneously. I see everybody's life. And see, when you start getting into this idea of a God and this concept of a God, it really opens your eyes and it makes you your jaw kind of drop. And the fact that He knows us the way that He knows us. He knows what our next action is going to be. Before we even know that it's going to happen, that's what allows Him to not only know everything, but to allow us the freedom to do what we're going to do. He does not exist in our being and in our plane of existence the way that we do. He's different. He's holy. He's separate. And that idea of separate means He's set apart. Set apart from us physically. Set apart from us morally. God is I'm using this word guardedly. He is a strange but fantastic God. Okay? So that's how He is able to not just know what we're going to do, but allow us to do it. He is removed from us in that capacity. All right? If he was with us, wouldn't he, as human beings, aren't we tempted to interject ourselves when we see somebody is going to do something just bad, poor decision making? That's who we are. And God's saying, listen, I've told you what I want you to do, and it's up to you to do it now. I know what you're going to do, even if you don't, but I'm going to allow this to play out the way that it's supposed to play out, or it's going to play out. Okay? So God looks at things from what we would consider a timeless perspective. And He doesn't force these events to occur. He allows these events to occur. Man retains his freedom of action, and God has unlimited foreknowledge of those actions. I'm going to finish this up with a quote from a fellow named William Rowe, and you can look him up if you want to. But he said something that was very wise. He says, "For although God's foreordaining, in other words, causing something to happen, there's a difference. God's foreordaining does make that something happen. His foreknowledge does not make it happen. When God says something is going to occur, He causes it to occur, it's going to happen. He does make that happen. But simply because He knows something is going to happen doesn't make it happen. That belongs to the people who are involved in it. Okay? Things occur not because God knows them, rather He foreknows them because they occur and He has already seen them occur." Kind of boils it down a little bit better, but it just also goes to show the magnitude of the God we serve. I mean, just the power and the knowledge of God is just eclipses anything. It's hard for us to understand, but He has seen already what's going to occur. He knows who's going to get to heaven. Even though He hasn't ordained that, He knows who's going to heaven. And it'd be tough to be a human being in that, because we would spend the rest of our life grieving, wouldn't we? Over those who had decided, we knew, if we looked at somebody we knew they weren't going to heaven, wouldn't you grieve over such a person? Especially if it was a family member or a friend or a co-worker or somebody that you cared a great deal about. See, God is... and it's because He exists where He existed, He's able to do those things. Because can you imagine the infinite amount of sorrow? I mean, He's so happy when someone chooses to go to heaven, but He's also infinitely sad that they choose not to. So, all right, any questions? It's our philosophy class for the night.